Welcome back to the CS160 programming tutorial. This is iteration 7. In iteration 7, we're going to expand our Java solution from iteration 6 to encompass a subset of the reporting requirements. Specifically in iteration 7, we are going to add Java code to the main class to partially satisfy functional requirement number 9. In part, that requirement reads, the program must generate the following report, and values supplied by variables are shown in red. So we're going to generate the report title, credit card payment analysis report, and then you'll notice we're going to generate some other headings that incorporate the values that we read in the inputs. We're also going to ensure that the code satisfies technical requirement number 4. That is, the program must use only tab characters to effect spacing when generating the analysis report. And the tab width must be set to 12 characters. We'll see that by default, the Eclipse environment sets the tab width to 8. So we're going to have to modify that to set it to 12. Also, we're going to need to ensure that the code satisfies technical requirement number 5. A decimal format object must be used to round and format the dollar values in the analysis report. The traditional half-up rounding mode must be used. By traditional, we mean that the least significant digit, if it's 5 or more, we round up, otherwise we round down. We're also going to run the program using input from both sample runs number 1 and number 2 to verify that the actual output matches the expected output from the programming assignment. Before we proceed to code design, we're going to do a little algorithm refinement, because not all steps of the given algorithm from the program design are of equal complexity. And by complexity, we mean how many Java statements are necessary to implement a particular step of the algorithm. The simplest kind of mapping would be one Java statement per one line of the algorithm. But it's very common that when we construct algorithms, we do construct them at a higher level than that, and it's a good idea to refine them into a series of simpler ones, and that makes then the mapping to code much simpler. So in particular, step 12 addresses functional requirement number 9, generate the credit card payment analysis report. What we're going to do is refine that into 3 simpler steps, and there actually could be more. But for this tutorial, 3 will be sufficient. So the first sub-step will simply be display the report title, and the second is we're going to display those headings that combine a label with one or more of the inputs. And then 12.3 will address in a future iteration. Okay, given that refinement, we can now discuss code design. So to partially address functional requirement number 9 and implement steps 12.1 and 12.2, which is the subset of the report we want to generate, we're going to need a sequence of output statements. Now, there are actually several different ways we could construct this sequence of output statements. The first thing we could do, I labeled it option number 1, is just one output statement per line of output, including the blank lines. And there needs to be a blank line before and after the title. So if we did that, we'd have 2 output statements for the blank lines, 1 for the title, and 3 additional ones for these other headings. So that would be 6 statements in all. Option number 2 is we could write 1 output statement per non-empty line, and then we'll use the special character \n to generate the empty lines. So here we would only need 4 output statements. And option number 3 would just be to use 1 output statement, and wherever we need a blank line, or to terminate a line, we'll insert a \n. And then if our output line contains both a label and a variable value, we'll use the concatenation operator plus to compose those lines. Now we're going to select for the tutorial here option number 2. So we're going to use the \n to generate the empty lines, and that'll reduce the number of statements we need to 4. To satisfy technical requirement number 4, that is, we're only allowed to use tab characters to affect spacing, we're going to use the \t, which is the tab character, to indent and align the output. And we're going to have to change the default tab width from 8 to 12. And that's an Eclipse Java property, so we're not actually going to add code to do that. We're going to do something within the Eclipse environment to do that. With respect to knowing how many tab characters we're going to need, well, I indicated here we need to indent 24 spaces from the left margin, which will be equivalent to 2 tab characters. Well, how did I know that? Well, let's take a look at sample run number 2. And all I did was I counted the number of characters from the first one at the left margin over to the first one in the title. And if you count those, you'll see that there are 24, which is exactly 2 tab stops. And to satisfy technical requirement number 5, we'll declare and instantiate a decimal format object. We'll then configure it with the half up rounding mode. Rounding mode is another Java built-in class. And we're going to use the format method of the decimal format object to display the credit card balance. Well, the decimal format object takes a string parameter, and the string parameter defines how the value is going to be displayed. And if we take a look at our values, we'll see that they could be in the thousands, and since we want to display them as dollars and cents, we always want 2 decimal digits. Well, we need to review pages 174 to 181 of the Gaddis text that discusses the decimal format object, as well as taking a look at the code in the Calculating Sales Commission case study. They actually have an example that has exactly the formatting pattern we want to use. And it's always useful to review sample code as an aid to figuring out what kind of code we need. Okay, now we've discussed the requirements, refined the algorithm, discussed our code design. So now we're ready to go over to our Eclipse project and begin implementing the code. Okay, so here is the current code for our credit card payment analyzer main method. And we're going to begin with our declarations and instantiation of the decimal format object. So we'll go up here to step number 3. And the first thing we need to do is to declare our decimal format object. I'll just call it df, and we're going to declare and instantiate that in one step. And as I said before, what we're going to need is a string for the constructor that defines a pattern for how we want our double value to be displayed, the double values that represent dollar amounts. And if we did review the associated pages in the Gaddis text as well as look at that case study I pointed you to, you'll note that the pattern that we're going to need looks like this. Let me just briefly explain this pattern. The pound sign represents a decimal digit. If that decimal digit is 0, then nothing will be displayed. So we're indicating here we could have a value in the thousands, but if we don't, those leading zeros will not be displayed, neither will the comma. The zeros also represent a decimal digit, but here we're saying that if that digit is 0, we want to display it. So we will always have at least one digit displayed before the decimal point and always have 2 digits afterwards. So we'll always get the penny amounts. All right, so once we've declared and instantiated our decimal format object, the next thing we'll do is we're going to configure it to do the kind of rounding we want. So we're going to use the set rounding mode, and the rounding mode we want is half up, and that is a constant of the rounding mode class. And there we have it. Okay, so now we've declared, instantiated, and configured our decimal format object. Now we can begin generating the output report. Now we said what we're going to do here in generating the analysis report is we're going to take our current step and divide that into 3. So we're going to display the report title. We're going to display the cardholder name, balance, and percentage rate for the interest. And then we're going to display the payment table. So for this iteration, we're going to address 12.1 and 12.2. We know that we need an output statement, and we're going to use print line for that. And we said that with respect to the report title, we need a blank line before and after the title. So we will generate that using \n. And then we can add a string for the report title. Oops. Little fumble finger here. And a \n to generate the blank line afterwards. And then for 12.2, 12.2 is actually going to expand into 3 Java statements, one for the cardholder name, one for the balance, and one for the interest rate. All right, so I'm just going to do a little copy and paste here. All right, so the first thing we're going to need is the cardholder name. So we'll display the label, and then we need the last name, that is the value of the string variable last name, and I'm using the concatenation operator to combine those two. And then after the last name, we have a comma and a space, and then we have the value of the first name, and then we have another space, and then the middle name. Oh, I misspelled the variable there. All right, so that takes care of that line. And the next one we're going to do in a similar way. We're going to do the balance. So again, we'll have the label, balance owed. And since this is a dollar amount, we need to prefix our double value with the $sign. And now we got to make sure we format it. All right, so all dollar amounts need to be formatted using our decimal format object, and we're going to use the format method. and we just send whatever value we want formatted as the argument, and it will return a string that is properly formatted for display. And then the final line we need is the interest rate. And that is held in the variable APR. And we need to make sure we append that with a percent sign. Okay, so there we go. So now we're ready to test, and we're going to use our sample runs number 1 and number 2. All right, so let me save that. Now let's run that. All right, so we got carry, lots of debt. And what's the APR of that card? It's 13.65, and the balance is $2,013. And our minimum, comfortable, and maximum are 25, 35, 50, and 45. All right, so I'm taking a look at this, and I noticed that I got my dollar amount formatted correctly, displayed, the name formatted correctly and displayed, interest rate displayed correctly, but I do notice one major problem, and that's the spacing's not correct. Everything's tight against the left margin. All right, so that's an error. Okay, the content's okay, but the spacing's not. And the spacing's not correct because I forgot to add the tab values. So I got to go back to my output statements and make sure I enter the tabs. And we need to tab over 2 times for each line. All right, so there I made those changes. So let's run it again, and we'll enter the same information. Okay, that looks pretty good. I want to show you how to change the default tab stops. What I'm doing here, I'm right clicking in this output area, then I'm selecting preferences. Okay. And when preferences come up, you'll see that there in the dialog box is a property called displayed tab width. And right now that displayed tab width is 8. Okay. So even though our report is indented nicely, all the columns aligned, it's not indented far enough. It's only indented 16 spaces, not 24. So we're going to change that value to 12. Okay, and if I say OK, you'll notice it immediately applies that. And once you change this value, it'll stay changed from time to time. Okay, so you don't have to change those preferences every time you open up Eclipse. All right, so now that I've changed that, now the output looks correct. The content's correct, the spacing's correct. So now let's run it on our other test case, which is the I'm a bee spender. And we'll see that if we take a look at this output, it also matches the output from sample run 2. So we're fairly confident at this point that our code is correct. But I would recommend we try one more test case, and that test case is basically when this value here is, let's say, smaller than a dollar or near a dollar. So we'll just make sure that our formatting works correctly in that case. So I'm going to run a very quick test case. Make a very small APR. Let's make a very small. What if we just owe like 50 cents? And this is what I want to see. I want to make sure that we always have at least one zero before the decimal point and have both decimal digits displayed even if the second one is a zero. All right, so now I'm much more confident that the code we implemented is correct, and so that completes iteration 7.